Morning all, let's have a look at another interesting Magnus Carlsen game, this time when he was about 12 years old, with a FIDE rating, believe it or not, of 2385. His opponent on this occasion was Helgi Gretarsson. So the question is, would Magnus hand Helgi's arse on a plate? Sorry, pardon the English expression. Okay, so let's get into the game. D4 from Magnus. And Helgi, who by the way is 2513, a very formidable FIDE rating, and this is in the European Clubs Cup. Okay, he plays the Slav defense, a rock solid system against Magnus. So how does Magnus spice things up? After knight F3, knight F6, knight C3, we see E6, Semi-Slav, that formidable rock solid triangle formation. E3 for Magnus, not going into the bishop G5 lines here. Knight Bd7, and now Queen C2, which you might think is a curious move. And actually, after bishop D6, can you guess what Magnus played here? It's quite an aggressive opening idea, which spices things up, which maybe in a way utilises, here's a clue, the weakness of the last move. The bishop's just come off G7. How could G7 be used here? What energetic move could make use of G7? I'll give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, interesting opening move. G4. I think it has become fairly standard, this idea, in a few different systems. I think there's a gamut against the Philidor's lion in one of the systems there. This G4 idea is very aggressive, but you know, the opponent's very, very strong. What does he do? Okay, he plays knight takes G4. He calls Magnus's bluff over this, because it does damage a bit White's position as well, losing that pawn. Rook G1. Now actually the knight doesn't humbly retreat. Black counterattacks with Queen F6. Okay. So what is happening here? Magnus takes on G4. Queen takes F3. Rook takes G7. Okay, threatening now this pawn, which is now protected with knight F6. Now bishop G2, queen goes to H5, and now Magnus plays in this position E4. I think if we look at this position right here now, after bishop G2, queen H5, it looks as though there's an immediate threat of at least winning the exchange. If the rook's forced to go back to G3, then just win the exchange. Where is the rook going? How is it protected? So this E4 move here, okay, is opening up the position. Black is backward in development. There's an immediate threat now of E5. Black has to do something about it. This move rules out, of course, any queen H6. G5 now it might also be made use of. So Black replies with D takes E4. And Magnus plays actually in this position bishop G5. You might think knight takes E4 is worthy of consideration as well. Okay, in this position bishop F8 is offering, actually quite cunningly it seems, two pieces for the rook. So is Black a master tactician about to win material from the poor little kid Magnus, who's only 12 years old at this point in his career? Well, his rook hasn't got too many options, so he has to take on F6. After takes. Now, unfortunately, it seems visually has Magnus blundered, because Rook G8 skewers two rooks. Give me a skewers two bishops rather. The Rook G8 skewers two bishops here. So, but it's Magnus's turn. He can do something which seemingly is quite powerful. He plays knight takes e4. So if the rook dares to take here, then there's knight f6 check. Forking king and queen. But black now plays check. Is this part of a big miscalculation? Well, it's going to be the exchange down. However, it's not so clear. After king f1, rook takes g7. Okay, we can at first observe white is the exchange down. For how many pawns, you might ask? Actually, it's equal on pawns. But look at the dark squares. They're quite dangerous for black here, aren't they? Bishop's not developed yet. Rook's not developed yet. Okay, Magnus doesn't panic. He plays queen c1. Okay, because this queen is controlling d2, so he wants to get onto the dark squares and have fun with d6 and f6. Ready to party on those dark squares. Queen d8, queen f4 now, offering d4. What is going on here? Well, if queen takes d4, just knight f6 check would win that queen, so it can't be taken there. Or knight d6. So king f8, and now queen e5 is played. Okay, black does seem to be tied down. Rook g6, as though black wants to play, well, maybe a few things in this position. Maybe at some point king g8, but without the hassle of knight f6. The rook is protecting f6. Magnus interrupts that plan. He plays check. After king e7, he snaps that pawn on h7. And now you might ask, well, d4, the centre pawn for flank pawn. We need to check this out after, but intuitively it looks as though it's too dangerous to take on d4 because of the check. Maybe, but we'll check that out in a little bit in the second pass through the game, because actually king f8, we're holding h8 there, so that's interesting if black could have played queen d4 in this position or not. Black deemed it too dangerous and played actually queen g8, which does seem to have the advantage of not only challenging the queen, but there's a double battery now, a battery on g2. Magnus avoids the exchange of queens, so he plays this check. After f6 he moves the bishop out of the way, offering an entire rook here after rook g1 if white wants to munch the rook. But what will happen to black's king safety after queen f6? Black didn't want to take that risk. He played e5. And now also e5 threatens queen c4 check, which is also dangerous because you can imagine something like, well, king e1, rook g1, bishop e2, there might be other dangerous things on the cards. So in this position, Magnus calmly protects his c-pawn with b3. Okay. Now, this looks quite risky, what black does next. You might think he wants to develop the bishop and try and make use of the exchange up. But maybe, you know, he feels threatened in this position by d5, actually. Because then d6 will be a menace. This looks very unpleasant, this d5 possibility. If the queen ever captured, then maybe queen h7 check, picking up the rook. So maybe this helps explain why black in this position decided lesser evil was e takes d4. Potentially opening up the e file to his own king. Knight g3. Okay, making way for rook e1 to be check, but also the knight is ready to pounce and it blocks rook g1 checks. Quite importantly. Bishop g4. Check. In this position, Magnus plays bishop e4. And the rook moves to g7. And then we see h3 evicting the bishop, trying to evict the bishop at least. Bishop d7. Check. King f8. Magnus switches over to the queen side with this check. After king f7. Now, what does Magnus play in this position? if I give you 10 seconds, you might want to pause the video here, think about the position under great scrutiny, inverted commas, scrutinize the position, find a gem somewhere in your search for resources. So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, Magnus finishes the game beautifully with this next very powerful move, bishop g6 check. What can black do? If he takes, well, black resigns, but if he takes queen h5 as mate, the knight's pretty useful on g3 there after all. If he takes here, he's king's embarrassingly out of squares after queen e7, that's mate. Let's just make sure of that. Let's turn the evil engines on and do a post-mortem of this game. It is mate in 1, yes. Let's go back. So, what did the engines think of Magnus's opening here? The gambit with g4 coming up after bishop d6, pouncing on that weakness for the last move. g4's not mentioned. Black's better. Black's slightly better off this. But maybe with h6 or dc, not the obvious, more obvious knight g4. So knight g4, rook g1. Okay, black's still better. Queen f6. Now, engine likes white's compensation a little bit. What is going on here? Rook takes g4, queen takes f3. Rook takes g7, knight f6. In a way, this is very committal, this bishop g2. You might think, keep the reverse rook back for the rook. So it looks a little bit controversial to play bishop g2 here. Because after queen h5, as well as queen h6, there might be bishop f8 on the cards as well. As well as queen h2, of course. So e4. And actually queen h2 is mentioned here as one of black's better moves, better tries, queen h2. Let's have a quick check on queen h2. Takes h2, bishop f3, h5. This might be okay for black. Queen finds a slot on h3. Okay, so in the game after e4, we saw d takes e4. Now bishop g5. You might think, oh, hold on a sec, was this a blunder? What about just knight takes e4? What's wrong with that? Knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, queen takes h2, go with queen c3. Is this so bad? Well, it's a different game, basically. It looks as though it's about equal, but okay. But after bishop g5, this spices things up, and the engine thinks actually initially black is better after bishop f8. The rook is trapped here in this forcing sequence, and now we see rook g8. Is this all part of a masterful positional sacrifice by Magnus, who was only 12 at the time, but with a FIDE rating of 2385? This is quite an amazing bit of calculation if it is all just one big positional sacrifice, including looking at queen a5 check, because then he has to factor in the power of queen c1 here to get onto the dark squares. Magnus does seem to be the Mozart of chess at this age, to be quite honest. I don't know what you think on YouTube, but this is remarkable stuff to be playing against a 2-5-1-3 opponent. So the exchange down, but black has huge dark square problems. Okay, so queen f4, king f8, queen e5, rook g6. We see the check, and now taking on h7. So what was wrong with queen d4? Or was there anything wrong with queen d4? Maybe it's black's best chance. The engine likes queen d4. Takes d4, check. As long as the king doesn't go onto a light square, because then there'll be no, even here there's no major checks. The king might even go onto a light square. Maybe that's even the best move, because king f8. Okay, that for some reason that's less powerful than king e8. But here, yes, maybe, you know, the checks are stopped. There's no check on h8. Would Magnus be able to do something here? Bishop f3 does mean rook d1 though, which is dangerous for d8. So bishop d7, rook d1, say. Let's go with this check. Now here actually white gets the advantage. These dark squares are weak persistently. Bishop e2, queen c2. Let's go with this. Knight d6 check. What is going on here? Knight takes f7. And white's getting the advantage again. It's magical. Well, it's not that surprising though. It's difficult to evaluate this position. But it seems bishop f3 is a powerful resource for rook d1 to get this rook in the game on that centre file. Let's go with queen g7 then, if we want to try and defend with black. Rook d1, bishop d7. Rook d3 to avoid rook g1 taking the rook. e5. Maybe this is okay for black. This might be okay for black. Any knight d6 you might think? Well, there's king f8 now. Possibly the worst is over. So in the game, was a blunder actually played then in not taking on d4, not daring to take on d4, queen g8. So we see the check, f6, and then we see bishop f3, offering an entire rook. Let's see, that does lead to slaughter time, doesn't it? Taking the rook here. Check. Check. Or is it? Is it just a draw? My perpetual. Might be just a draw by perpetual here. Let's see, let's just give the engine some time here to think about this position. It looks as though... Hang on. Not that much time. Depth 16, knight takes f6, not the more blatantly obvious queen f6 check, but knight takes f6, attacking the queen. Also there's a double check now, threatens. So queen f7, double check's not necessarily as effective as just simply knight g4 here apparently. Knight g4 check. Knight e5. Is black in serious trouble? If he goes to f5, bishop e4, where's the queen going? Curious position. The bishop, knight and queen are all ready for action here, and the black queen seems trapped in this position. That does seem hopeless for black. Curiously, so this conception seems very good as well. How many conceptions in one game, basically? Giving up the rook for knight takes f6. So we'll promote that variation. Knight takes f6. So you'll see that in PGN on the description of this video. Knight takes f6. Seems crushing. We tried queen f7. Queen g6, does that make any difference? Now there's knight d5 double check. 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 If king h8, is that terrible? Well, there's queen f8 mating. So black will be forced to give up the queen here. So, this is very unpleasant stuff, taking this rook, basically. So e5 was played, and now I guess white's doing well, better than before. b3 protecting c4. Now ed is recommended by the engine, ed, even though it looks incredibly dangerous. Knight g3. Bishop g4 was played. We see check. So is there a slip up again from black? After bishop e4, rook g7 was played. Anything better than rook g7? Rook g5. Provoking f4 does weaken white's king maybe a little bit. Rook g7. Not so clear. If h3, like in the game, Can we simulate the game here? Well, with f4 g3 is weakened, so queen h5 check it's not working, is it? In this position, I guess king f7 is still the mate with bishop g6, yes, but a rook e7 here, and again white slightly better, almost. Bishop f5. Hang on, was there a move here? In this position, bishop g6. Might be okay for black. Anything stronger? Okay. At depth 18 anyway, it looks as though there's chances for equality potentially if black can get out of this. So we'll go back. So bishop e4, we're approaching the humongous blunder now. After h3, the bishop went back. Oh, hang on, what's happened here? I think this might be it already. Bishop e6 to keep equality. If bishop e6, let's go with this check as in the game, and the check here. Basically, the e file is being shielded by that bishop, so there might not be such a spectacular continuation. When the 2500 instead retreated his bishop to d7, he has left this X-ray attack of the rook on that e file. That's picked up with queen h5. Here, by the way, I think giving up the exchange is no good. I think just taking and then rook e7 deflection to win that queen. So after this continuation, bishop d7, this is his terminal for black. Check, and this crushing, absolutely crushing move, bishop g6. Any other move, the king's got g6. You know, bishop d5 is harmless. Just take that, and then there's nothing. You know, the king's just going to g6. But Magnus is a special name for that tactic, causing the opponent's pieces to block the king. The rook doesn't want to be on g6 here, but that's the case. For example, like this. So great game by Magnus when he was just 12 years old in the European Clubs Cup. 4th of October 2003. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.